The bridal suite at the Harrington Grand in downtown Chicago smelled like white roses and money. Elena Voss knew that smell. She had negotiated the contract for this hotel's catering partnership herself, 3 years ago, sitting across a mahogany table from men who kept glancing at her husband instead of her, even though she was the one who had read every clause. She walked in without knocking. The room went quiet the way rooms do when someone enters who is not supposed to be there. Natalie Brennan stood near the floor-length mirror in a gown that caught the afternoon light coming off Lake Michigan. It was ivory, structured, architectural, the kind of dress that required a certain kind of confidence to wear. Natalie had that confidence. She had been practicing it for 2 years, ever since Daniel Voss first told her that his marriage was already over in every way that mattered. Daniel was near the window, adjusting his cufflinks in the reflection. He saw Elena before he turned around. He turned around anyway, slowly, and smiled. Not the smile Elena remembered from 15 years ago when he drove a used Honda and called her his compass. This was the smile he had learned later, the one that appeared in Forbes profiles and charity gala photographs. Curated. Impenetrable. His mother, Rosalind Voss, sat in a high-backed chair near the vanity with a glass of sparkling water and the posture of a woman who had decided decades ago that elegance was a form of aggression. She looked at Elena the way people look at a small stain on expensive upholstery. Noticeable. Inconvenient. Already being mentally removed. Their attorney, a compact man named Griffin Hale, stood near the door with a leather portfolio pressed against his chest like a shield. Elena held an envelope. Daniel spoke first. His voice was calibrated the way expensive things are calibrated, to appear effortless while concealing enormous engineering. Elena, you actually came. He glanced at Natalie, and something passed between them. Not love. Confirmation. Natalie adjusted the small diamond earring at her left ear and stepped forward with her bouquet hanging from one hand like a prop she hadn't quite figured out yet. I have to say, I admire the audacity. She smiled with her teeth. I thought you'd have more dignity than this. Elena looked at her without hurry. Dignity is exactly what brought me here. Rosalind set down her water glass. The sound was deliberate. The car service is waiting outside, Elena. Griffin has the documents. You sign. You receive the settlement we agreed on, and everyone moves forward like adults. Griffin cleared his throat and opened the portfolio. Mrs. Voss, if you look at Section 3, the asset division has been structured to ensure. I've read it, Elena said. Daniel extended his hand toward the portfolio, impatient in the way of men who have stopped believing that waiting applies to them. Then you know it's fair. More than fair. Sign it, take the check, and let us get through this afternoon. Elena did not look at the documents. She looked at Daniel. She took her time, the way you take your time when you already know how the sentence ends. She saw a man she had driven to the emergency room at 2 a.m. when his appendix nearly ruptured during the launch week of their first distribution deal. A man she had coached through 3 investor presentations while 7 months pregnant. A man who used to keep a handwritten list of everything they still wanted to do together, tucked into the back of a journal she had given him on their 5th anniversary. She had found the journal last spring. The list stopped in year 9. The suite smelled like the flowers she had not chosen for someone else's wedding. On the glass side table near the ice bucket there were 2 champagne flutes, a room service menu, and Griffin's open laptop showing a society column preview with the headline, Daniel Voss and Natalie Brennan, Chicago's new power couple redefines the hospitality industry. Natalie noticed Elena reading it. She tilted her head slightly, the way people tilt their heads when they want to appear generous in victory. They got the framing right, I think. Fresh chapter. New energy.
She paused.
No offense. None taken, Elena said, from someone who still thinks this story starts with her. Rosalind stood. That is enough. Elena, you built something with Daniel, yes. No one is erasing that. But businesses evolve. Families evolve. Natalie understands the vision going forward in a way that I don't. Elena finished. She said it without heat. That was the part that made Rosalind stop. Griffin stepped forward. Mrs. Voss, the offer is generous. If you choose to contest the current structure, the timeline extends significantly, and frankly, the optics. "I'm not contesting," Elena said. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Not with thunder. Just a quiet redistribution of weight. The way a room shifts when the person everyone thought was losing stops looking like they're losing. Daniel's smile thinned. "Then sign." Elena opened her envelope. She did not take out Griffin's documents. She took out a single folded page, cream-colored, with a notary's seal visible at the bottom. Daniel frowned. "What is that?" Natalie stepped closer, the bouquet swaying. "Just sign the real paperwork, Elena. The ceremony starts in 40 minutes and no one wants a scene." Elena looked at Natalie with something close to patience. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because the last signature on the most important document in this room needed to be mine." She signed the paper she had brought. Slowly, with the pen she had carried in her coat pocket. Her own pen. Griffin's face changed first. A small change. Nearly invisible. But Elena had spent 15 years reading rooms full of men who tried not to show what they knew. He recognized the document. Daniel looked between them. "Griffin, what is she holding?" Griffin did not answer immediately. And in that half-second of silence, Natalie's bouquet stilled. Rosalind's composure developed a hairline fracture, and Elena tucked her copy back into the envelope. "You'll find out this afternoon," Elena said. "Right around the time your bank calls." She picked up her bag, walked to the door, turned back once, not for drama, but because she wanted to see Daniel's face before the understanding reached it. It was almost there. She walked out into the corridor where the wedding guests were being guided toward the ballroom, and the lake glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like it had no opinion about any of this. She did not look back again. But behind the closed door of the bridal suite, Griffin Hale was already dialing. Elena took the service elevator down, not because she was hiding, because she had learned, over 15 years of building something from a single catering contract and a shared credit card with a $4,000 limit, that the people who actually kept things running always used the service elevator. The ones who used the grand staircase were usually the ones whose names appeared on things other people had built. The elevator opened into a corridor that smelled like industrial cleaner and warm bread. A young woman in a black server's uniform recognized her and stopped walking. Her name tag said Priya. She had worked at the Harrington Grand for 2 years, hired through a hospitality staffing partnership that Elena had personally negotiated with the hotel's operations director. Priya did not say anything. She just nodded, the specific nod of someone who knows more than they are paid to acknowledge. Elena nodded back. Outside, the November air off, Lake Michigan cut through her coat. She had not arranged a car. She had taken a cab here, the way she used to take cabs home from the office on late nights before the company grew large enough to make that seem strange. She stood on the side street adjacent to the hotel and breathed the cold air and let it mean something. Her phone had been vibrating since she left the suite. She did not check it yet. There was a coffee shop across the street, small, independent, the kind that survived in downtown Chicago by being exactly itself and nothing else. Elena crossed and went inside and ordered a black coffee and sat at a table near the window where she could see the Harrington Grand's side entrance. She opened her phone. 17 messages. 4 missed calls. 2 from Griffin. 1 from a number she did not recognize, which she understood immediately was Natalie calling from a borrowed phone because Elena had blocked hers 6 weeks ago. 1 from her financial advisor, Margaret Chen, whose message read simply, "Confirmed." 1 from the corporate registrar's office. 1 from a woman named Diane, who had been Elena's operations director for 9 years and who wrote, "They just tried to run the campaign approval. System flagged it. Holding as discussed." Elena read that one twice. Then she set the phone face down on the table and drank her coffee. She thought about the first time she had sat in a room with investors and felt them speak around her like she was decorative. Daniel had not done it maliciously then. He had done it the way people do things that culture has told them are natural. He had leaned forward when they spoke and leaned back when she did, and afterward said she had been brilliant, completely brilliant, and kissed her temple, and she had believed that the distinction did not matter as long as the work moved forward. The work always moved forward. That was the problem, and also the proof. Voss Hospitality Group had started as a catering operation run out of their apartment in Lincoln Park. Elena had written the first business plan on a Saturday morning while Daniel slept late. She had cold called their first 3 clients herself. She had handled the licensing, the health department inspections, the insurance negotiations, the payroll software, the vendor contracts. Daniel had the charm and the vision and a genuine talent for walking into a room and making people feel like they were about to be part of something extraordinary. She had never resented that. Charm was real. Vision was real. But neither of them kept the lights on when the third quarter came in short. What kept the lights on was Elena, at 11 o'clock at night, restructuring payment schedules with suppliers who trusted her because she had never once misled them about a timeline. When the company grew, Daniel grew with it in the direction of cameras and keynote invitations. Elena grew deeper into the architecture of the thing, the contracts, the intellectual property registrations, the licensing agreements, the quiet structures that made the visible parts possible, including one structure that almost no one knew about anymore. 7 years ago, during a period when Voss Hospitality was expanding too quickly and taking on debt that made Elena's chest tighten every morning, a corporate attorney named Francis Webb had advised them to separate the operational company from the underlying brand assets. The recipes, the proprietary service methodology they had developed, the trademark portfolio, the master licensing agreements with their hotel and venue partners. Francis had suggested placing those assets in a separate holding entity with dual signature requirements for any transfer, licensing change, or brand association. Daniel had signed because Francis recommended it and because Elena asked him to, and because at that point he still believed that the details belonged to her and the vision belonged to him, and that those two things were a partnership. He had not thought about it since. Elena had thought about it consistently. 18 months ago, when she first understood what was happening between Daniel and Natalie, not from evidence of romance, but from the specific way he had started removing her name from external communications, from the way Natalie had begun appearing in brand meetings that had no reason to include a marketing consultant, from the way Griffin had started asking questions about asset valuation that had no innocent explanation, Elena had called Francis Webb. Francis was now 71 and semi-retired and had taken the call from her home in Evanston on a Tuesday afternoon and listened without interrupting for 12 minutes. Then she had said, "The structure is still intact. Everything you put in place is still there." And Elena had understood that the most important work she had ever done for the company was work she had done quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon 7 years ago, in a lawyer's office that Daniel did not attend because he had a lunch with a hotel developer in the Gold Coast. Inside the Harrington Grand, the wedding ceremony had started. Elena knew this because she could see, from the coffee shop window, the last few guests hurrying through the side entrance. A woman in a blue dress. A man straightening his tie. A photographer adjusting a lens cap. She also knew this because Diane texted again. They tried to access the master licensing portal. Second attempt in 20 minutes. Both blocked. Also, Natalie's team submitted a press release naming her as brand creative director of VHG. "We did not authorize it. Wire service flagged it as unverified." Elena typed back, "Archive everything with timestamps." Then she called Margaret. Margaret answered on the first ring. "It's done on our end. The account restructuring you authorized last week is fully processed. The operational accounts are intact. Payroll is protected through Q1. But Elena, he's going to find out in the next hour, maybe less." "I know," Elena said. "Griffin is good. He's going to look for angles." "There are no angles," Elena said. "Francis closed them in 2017. A pause. Then Margaret said, with something in her voice that was not quite admiration but was close to it, "You've been carrying this for a long time." Elena watched a cab pull up to the Harrington Grand. Nobody got out. The cab idled. "I wasn't carrying it," she said. "I was waiting for them to touch it." She finished her coffee. Outside, the cab was still idling. The lake was flat and gray and enormous. Somewhere on the 14th floor of the Harrington Grand, Daniel Voss was standing at an altar next to a woman who believed she was marrying an empire. Elena's phone lit up with a call from Griffin. She let it ring. Then, 3 minutes later, Daniel called from his personal cell. She watched his name on the screen, The name she had once saved as My Compass Man changed to his full legal name sometime around year 11 when she stopped being able to find the person she was looking for. She let that ring too. But she did not leave the coffee shop yet, because she knew what was coming next, and she wanted to be close enough to watch the building when it happened. The call she was actually waiting for came 4 minutes later. It was Francis Webb. They triggered the clause, Francis said, without greeting. Natalie Brennan's team filed a brand association request through the marketing portal using Daniel's credentials. It cross-referenced the proposed creative director announcement. A brief pause. The automated system did exactly what we designed it to do. Elena set down her cup. All of it. All of it. His signing authority on the master licensing agreements is suspended pending dual signature reinstatement. The hotel partner contracts are frozen for new modifications. The franchise expansion filings are on hold. Another pause. He can still run the restaurants, Elena. The operations are untouched. But he cannot move the brand. He cannot license it. He cannot associate it with anyone new. Not without you. Through the coffee shop window, Elena saw a man in a hotel uniform emerge from the Harrington Grand side entrance and speak urgently into a radio. Then she saw Griffin, still in his ceremony clothes, appear behind him on his phone, his free hand pressing flat against the brick wall of the building the way people press their hands against walls when they need something solid. Francis, Elena said. Yes. Thank you for 2017. Francis made a sound that was dry and warm at the same time. Thank you for reading the contract. Elena ended the call, picked up her bag, and for the first time that afternoon, allowed herself one small, nearly invisible thing that was not quite a smile, but was something in that direction. She left a $5 tip on a $3 coffee, walked back out into the November cold, and turned toward the parking structure where her car waited. Not a hired car, her own. Behind her, inside the Harrington Grand, the ceremony was still technically in progress. But the empire Daniel had promised Natalie was already ungovernable without the woman he had just tried to walk away from. And Elena had not yet walked into the building where the reception would be held. That was still coming. The reception venue was a converted warehouse in the West Loop that Voss Hospitality Group had transformed 3 years ago into one of Chicago's most sought-after event spaces. Elena had found the building. She had negotiated the lease. She had hired the architect and approved every material selection and sat in the space when it was still raw concrete and exposed pipe and told Daniel that it would become something people remembered. It was called the Meridian. Elena entered through the kitchen. She knew the head chef, Ramon, from the company's earliest catering days when he was a line cook who stayed late without being asked and learned every dish on the menu because he wanted to understand the whole thing, not just his station. She had promoted him twice. When Daniel restructured the culinary team 2 years ago to bring in a consultant Natalie had recommended, Ramon had been quietly moved sideways. He stayed because he believed in the food, and because Elena had called him personally and asked him to. He saw her come through the kitchen entrance and stopped mid-instruction to the prep team. Mrs. Voss, he said, not with surprise. With something steadier than surprise. The salmon course, Elena said, nodding toward the pass. Did they change the preparation? Ramon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Natalie's consultant wanted a deconstructed presentation. Said the original plating read as dated. Elena looked at the plate in front of her. The salmon had been separated from the components that gave it context. It looked expensive, and it looked lonely. Whose recipe is the base preparation? Ramon looked at her directly. Yours. From the 2011 menu. The one that got us the Midwest Hospitality Award. Elena picked up a spoon, tasted the sauce, set the spoon down. Plate it the original way for the remainder of service. Ramon did not hesitate. Yes, ma'am. She moved through the kitchen without rushing, acknowledging people by name, asking about specific things, a prep cook's culinary school application, a dishwasher who had recently become a father. These were not performances of memory. She actually knew. She had always known, because she had understood from the beginning that the people who held things together at the foundation deserved to be seen as clearly as the people whose names appeared on the building. When she stepped through the kitchen door into the reception hall, the party was in full effect. The meridian looked exactly as she would have designed it because she had designed it, and no amount of Natalie's aesthetic adjustments had been able to alter the bones of the space. Crystal pendants hung from the original timber ceiling. The bar ran the length of the north wall in dark walnut. The floral arrangements were white and architectural and beautiful, and Elena noted with a detachment that surprised her that they were genuinely beautiful, and that beauty did not belong to any one side. A string quartet played near the east windows. 200 guests moved through the space in the particular choreography of people who are wealthy enough to make celebration look effortless. Several people noticed Elena immediately. A business journalist named Todd Everett, who covered the Chicago hospitality industry and had interviewed Elena twice, lowered his champagne glass by a fraction of an inch. A woman named Sandra Park, who co-owned 4 restaurant groups and had been Elena's quiet ally through the company's growth years, turned from her conversation and met Elena's eyes across the room with an expression that communicated several things simultaneously, none of them simple. Elena crossed the room without theater. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. She stopped to speak briefly with a franchise partner from Milwaukee who had been with VHG for 6 years and who gripped her hand with both of his and said her name in a way that had history in it. She did not tell him what had already happened in the licensing system. She did not need to. His attorney had likely already called him. She was near the center of the room when Natalie saw her. Natalie was standing with a group of people Elena recognized as the creative and marketing team Natalie had assembled over the past year, positioned near the branded display that featured an oversized rendering of what was being called VHG's new visual identity. The logo had been modified. The color palette shifted. And in the corner of the display, in a font that was meant to look organic, was Natalie's name with a title beneath it. Creative Director, Voss Hospitality Group. Natalie excused herself from the group with a smile that did not reach the place where real smiles live and walked toward Elena with the particular velocity of someone who has decided that offense is the only remaining position. "You have to be extraordinary," she said, stopping close enough to be private but not quite private enough, "to think that showing up here changes anything that's already been signed and decided." Elena looked at the display, then at Natalie. "Nothing has been signed that you think has been signed." Natalie's smile held by sheer construction. "Griffin filed everything this morning." "Griffin filed a version of everything this morning," Elena said. "The version that didn't account for a dual signature clause on the master brand assets. The version that assumed I was going to be too tired or too sad or too busy being the wronged wife to have read the original incorporation documents." Something moved across Natalie's face. Not understanding yet. The edge of understanding, which was almost worse. "You don't own this brand," Natalie said. Her voice had dropped. "Daniel built this." Elena turned to face her fully. Not with anger. With the patience of someone who has been having this conversation in her head for 18 months and has already lived through every version of it. "Daniel built the front of this. I built the part that holds the front up. There's a legal structure that agrees with me, filed in 2017, that Daniel signed without reading because he trusted me." She paused. "He was right to trust me. He just forgot that trust works both ways." Natalie set her champagne down on a nearby table. Her hand was steady, but the placement was slightly off, the glass closer to the edge than she intended. "What did you do?" "I protected the company," Elena said. "The same thing I've been doing for 15 years. Daniel arrived then, cutting through the crowd with Griffin close behind him. He had the look of a man who had received information in stages and was still assembling the full picture, each new piece worse than the last. His bow tie was slightly loosened. The ceremony version of him, polished and absolute, had already begun to erode around the edges. He stopped when he reached them. He looked at Elena with something complicated that she recognized as the collision of fury and guilt, two things that had been living together in him for long enough that he could no longer fully separate them. "You froze the licensing agreements," he said. "I didn't freeze anything," Elena said. "The clause froze them. Automatically. When your team filed a brand association request for someone who isn't a dual signatory." "Elena." His voice dropped. Around them, guests had developed the particular stillness of people pretending not to listen while listening completely. "This is our wedding reception." "I'm aware." You're going to destroy everything we built over. I built, she said, without raising her voice, with you.
And what we built is fine.
The operations are running. The staff will be paid. The restaurants will open tomorrow morning. The only thing that's stopped is the part where you take what belongs to both of us and file it under a new name without asking me. Griffin stepped forward with the portfolio, lower-voiced, professionally urgent. Mrs. Voss, there are remedies here that don't require. I know all the remedies, Elena said. I've known them since Francis Webb explained the clause in 2017. I've been patient with this process, Griffin. I want you to understand that. What happened today was not impulsive. Griffin closed the portfolio.
He looked at Daniel.
That look said several things that attorneys are not supposed to say out loud. Sandra Park appeared at Elena's side without announcement. She did not touch her or make a gesture. She simply stood there, which said enough. Natalie, who had been very still, spoke again in a voice that had lost its earlier precision. You came here to humiliate us. Elena looked at her, and for a moment felt something that was not sympathy exactly, but was adjacent to it, a recognition of what it looked like to have built a plan on a foundation you hadn't verified. I came here because this building has my name on the incorporation documents, and I had a right to be here. What's happening to your evening isn't something I manufactured. It's something that was always going to happen the moment you filed that brand association request. She set her water glass down on the table, carefully, away from the edge. The food is better near the kitchen pass, she said to no one in particular. Ramon went back to the original plating. Then she walked toward the east side of the room where the windows looked out over the West Loop and the city moved below in its indifferent, luminous way, and she took out her phone, and she called Diane. How many franchise partners have reached out? She asked. 14 in the last 2 hours, Diane said. All wanting to know about continuity. Schedule a call for Monday morning. Tell them operations are protected and the brand review will be thorough and fair.
She paused.
And Diane, make sure Ramon's team gets a formal commendation in the next internal newsletter. Original recipe and all. She heard Diane smile through the phone. Already drafted. Behind her, the string quartet was still playing. The crystal pendants were still beautiful. 200 people were still holding champagne glasses in a room Elena had built. And somewhere near the branded display with the modified logo and the unauthorized title, Daniel Voss was learning, in real time, in front of the audience he had assembled to celebrate his new beginning, that the story he had been telling about himself had a co-author. And she had not signed the version he wrote alone. Elena left the Meridian at 9:17 in the evening. Not because she was asked to leave. Not because the room had become unbearable. She left because she had done what she came to do, and she had learned over 15 years of building something real, that knowing when to stop was the same skill as knowing when to begin. People who didn't understand that kept talking long after the point had landed. She had never been one of those people. Ramon walked her out through the kitchen. He didn't say much. He handed her a container of the salmon dish, packed carefully, the way cooks pack food for people they respect, and said only that the original plating had gotten 3 compliments in the last hour from guests who hadn't known they were missing it. She thanked him. She meant it completely. The November night had gotten colder. She stood on the sidewalk outside the service entrance for a moment, just breathing, letting the city sound wash over her. Delivery trucks. A distant train. Someone laughing on a corner half a block away with the specific freedom of a person who had nowhere to be and found that beautiful rather than frightening. She had not felt that kind of freedom in a long time. Her car was in the structure on Randolph. She walked there herself, no rush, her heels on the pavement making a sound she didn't try to soften. She had spent a significant portion of her adult life softening things, her presence in meetings, her corrections of Daniel's financial projections in front of investors, her voice when she needed to say something true that someone powerful didn't want to hear. She was finished with that particular form of shrinking. In the car she sat for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone had accumulated 43 notifications. She scrolled without opening most of them. There were messages from journalists, from franchise partners, from vendors, from 2 people she hadn't spoken to since the separation became publicly known who had apparently decided tonight was the right time to reappear. There was a long message from Rosalind Voss that Elena read once and then archived without responding, because Rosalind's grief was real, but it was grief for a version of her son she had manufactured, and Elena was not responsible for the distance between that version and the actual man. There was a message from Frances Webb that said only, "Well done. Sleep." There was a message from her sister, Kate, in Portland, who had known about all of this for 6 months and had said very little except the right things at the right moments, which was Kate's particular form of love and one of the most reliable things in Elena's life. Kate's message said, "Call me when you're in the car. I have wine, and I'm on the couch, and I want to hear your voice." Elena called her. Kate answered immediately. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Elena said. And then, because Kate deserved the more precise answer, "I'm something that doesn't have a clean word yet."
But yes.
Did it go the way Frances said it would? Exactly the way Frances said it would. Kate was quiet for a moment in the good way. Then, "And how do you feel about that?" Elena started the engine. The parking structure was nearly empty at this hour, just concrete and fluorescent light, and the smell of cold exhaust. "I feel like someone who carried a very heavy thing for a very long time and just set it down. And now I'm noticing that my arms are tired." "That's allowed," Kate said. "I know," Elena said. "I'm just not used to it yet." She drove out of the structure and onto Randolph, and the city opened up around her, lit and indifferent and gorgeous. She had always loved Chicago in the way you love something that does not require your love to continue being itself. It asked nothing of her. It would be exactly this beautiful whether she was thriving or devastated, and she found that honest quality more comforting than she could easily explain. She talked to Kate for 20 minutes while she drove. Not about the legal details or the reception or the look on Daniel's face when Griffin closed the portfolio. About smaller things. About the salmon recipe and Ramon's face when she told him to go back to the original plating. About Priya in the hotel corridor and the nod that contained an entire language. About the franchise partner from Milwaukee who had held her hand with both of his. About Sandra Park, who had simply stood beside her without being asked. About how many people had been quietly paying attention all along. Daniel called at 10:43. She was home by then, in the apartment she had moved into 8 months ago, when she finally accepted that the house in Lincoln Park had become a place where she was maintaining the appearance of a life rather than living one. The apartment was smaller and had good light in the mornings, and she had chosen every object in it with the specific deliberateness of someone furnishing a life that belonged entirely to herself. She answered. Not from obligation. From the understanding that some conversations needed to happen once, clearly, and then be finished. He sounded different than he had in the bridal suite. The performance had come down. What was left was a man in his mid-40s sitting somewhere quiet, probably alone, confronting the gap between the story he had been telling and the one that had actually occurred. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said. "I know," she said. "That was a mistake in your planning." A long pause. "Griffin says the suspension can be lifted if we go back to dual signature operations. If we restructure the agreement." Another pause, heavier. "With you at the table." "I've always been at the table," Elena said. "You just stopped setting a place for me." He didn't answer that immediately. She heard him breathe. She remembered when she had known every variation of the way he breathed. The rhythm of it when he was excited about something, the pattern when he was worried, the particular quality of his exhale when he was about to say something he'd been holding for a while.
She still recognized it.
That recognition was not love anymore. It was something more like fluency in a language she no longer lived in. "I made mistakes," he said, "not as a strategy." She could hear the difference. "Yes," she said. "I convinced myself that what I was doing to the company was separate from what I was doing to you. That they were two different things." A pause. "They weren't two different things."
"No," she said.
"They were the same betrayal with different paperwork." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might have nothing left. Then, "Is there anything that would make this?" "Daniel." She said his name gently, because gentle was what was true. "You're not asking me that because you want to repair us. You're asking it because you're frightened, and I was the person who fixed things when you were frightened, and some part of you hasn't caught up yet to the fact that I'm not available for that anymore." The silence that followed was the most honest thing that had happened between them in years. "The operations will run," she said. "The staff will be protected. I'm not interested in destroying what took us 15 years to build. But I am going to be present in the ownership structure in every way the documents require, and I am not going to make myself small again to make that easier for you." "What about Natalie?" he said. It came out less like a question about Natalie and more like a question about himself. "That's yours to figure out," Elena said. "I spent 15 years figuring out things that belong to both of us. I'm going to be more selective about that going forward." She let him go shortly after. Not with coldness and not with warmth. With the specific clarity of a conversation that has arrived at its actual end rather than merely stopping. She stood at the window of her apartment for a while after. The city below was doing what cities do at night, thinning out in some places, intensifying in others, indifferent to the private catastrophes and quiet victories taking place at every lit window. She thought about Natalie, alone in a bridal suite or a hotel room, dismantling whatever version of tomorrow she had constructed. She did not feel triumphant about that. She felt something more complicated, the recognition that ambition aimed at someone else's life always eventually ran out of road. She thought about Rosalind, who would wake up tomorrow and begin the work of revising her own narrative, which was the one project Rosalind had always been most devoted to. She thought about Griffin, who was competent and had known about the dual signature clause and had proceeded anyway, and who would spend the next professional chapter learning that there were documents worth reading before you assumed the person who wrote them wasn't paying attention. Then she stopped thinking about all of them, because they were not the subject of the life she was now responsible for constructing. She went to her desk and opened a folder she had been building for 4 months. Inside was the outline of something new, not a competitor to VHG. Not a gesture of revenge disguised as enterprise. Something genuinely hers, a smaller consultancy focused on the thing she had always been best at, which was seeing the architecture underneath the visible surface of a business and knowing which parts were load-bearing and which parts were decoration. She had already spoken to 3 potential clients. All 3 had come to her. None of them had asked about Daniel. She made tea. She sat with the folder. Outside, Chicago was being Chicago, enormous and indifferent and lit. Her phone showed one final message, sent from a number she didn't recognize, which she almost didn't open. It was from Natalie. For words. "How did you know?" Elena read it twice. She thought about not responding. Then she thought about the question underneath the question, which was not really about the legal clause or the 2017 filing, or the dual signature structure. It was the older question, the one women asked each other across the wreckage of situations built on the assumption that they wouldn't be paying attention. She typed back 6 words. "I always read the whole contract." She set the phone down, closed the business folder, finished her tea. The city outside did not applaud or acknowledge or witness. It simply continued, which was all she had ever really needed it to do. In the morning she would call Francis Webb. She would schedule Monday's franchise call with Diane. She would confirm Ramon's commendation. She would begin the first real chapter of something that did not require her to disappear into it. But tonight she sat in her own light, in her own space, in a life she had quietly been building the whole time everyone else assumed she was only maintaining someone else's, and she let that be enough. It was more than enough. It was, she understood finally, exactly the right size for a person who had stopped pretending to need less room than she actually took up. The city carried on below her window, indifferent and luminous, and entirely itself.
So did she.